Well, welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 401st meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a different speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view that had before or against something, we don't care what it is. We give our speaker an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we might interrupt or we listen only one fool at a time, one of our rules. And we have questions and answers up from the audience of the speaker. And then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everyone in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. The speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Any announcements?
I guess Philosophers Forum is meeting this week.
Come on up here.
Well, Philosophers Forum is meeting this Tuesday at the El Phoenix at Cleburne and Adelia. The lecture starts at 7:30, and I think Paul Benson is speaking on the history of Dallas. So if you missed that talk here, you can come to Philosophers Forum and you can hear the same talk.
Where is it going to be? What's the address?
9090 Skillman is the address.
Corner Skillman and O'Dean.
Yeah, it's the El Phoenix. There's only one El Phoenix.
That's called the philosophy. Whose name?
Philosophers Forum. That was Philosophers Forum. Yeah, we have a website, philosophersforum.org.
I've already heard about humanity.
That's Tuesday night?
Tuesday night.
Tuesday night, 7:30. All right.
$5.
$5? All right. All
Is
right.
it in a church or a freestanding?
That's a separate meeting room.
Oh, it's in a restaurant.
Newcomer.
Oh, is it out here?
Yeah, El Phoenix.
Oh, John, I want to mention Don here is he's here from Chicago. Don Selly. He's sitting right there. He used
Mentioned it.
I did mention it. And but anyway, he used to have a coffee club in Chicago. It's quite outstanding. He ran a whole place. Quite a guy.
Yeah, Don moved down from Chicago. He had enough of the winters.
He says you had enough of the winters. Absolutely. He's like, to disappear from winter and come here. So one of the advantages of not having over Chicago is you don't have only get 2 days of winter a year here. So.
Oh, sure.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah, right.
2 days of snow. That's it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You redefine day.
Yeah, redefined. 3 months. This has been lovely.
Next week is open. I need a speaker. If somebody wants to be one, let me know. We're looking for speakers. I'll be digging one up someplace. But anyway, just so you know, we're looking for speakers. You have no idea what I do, she says. Anyway, on March 10th, Gary Foster will be talking about Indian mascot now. Indian mascots are interesting. It's on the itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. On March 17th, examination of the current status of FBI's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. That's David Weiserman. He'll be talking about that. On March 24th, on the importance of understanding the distinction between service dogs and emotional support animals, Dr. Daniel Perlehy, he'll be talking here about that. It's quite interesting. And on April 28th, on the global status of human rights, Dr. Rick Halpern, Director of Embassy Human Rights, will be talking here. He was the first speaker we had in 2009. So that was how many years ago? 9 years ago? He was a speaker here. So anyway, he's having a return performance. Anyway, so our speaker tonight is Jim Gatewood. He's a Dallas history professor and best-selling Dallas author. He wrote a book called Slats Rogers and Love Field Lunatics. He will discuss and review his latest book, Slats Rogers and Love Field Lunatics. Jim will tell the story that is posted in the Texas Historical Marker, which stands at the main entrance of the McAllen International Airport. He will show, among other things, that when Slats was 18, he lied about his age and got a job with the railroad. His strong will and keen mind enabled him to slug his way up to railroad engineer. The young soldier of fortune discovered he could make money faster by hauling bootleg whiskey in the cab of his locomotive. Using his newfound wealth, he built the first airplane assembled in Cleburne, Texas, and he later founded the flying circus at Love Field in Dallas. And there is so much more to be said about his continuing path from rags to riches. Jim will bring back, he brought some books here for in case you want one. Anyway, without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Jim Gatewood.
This is sermon.
Thank you, Tom. Before we go into Slats Rogers, I want to say just a few words about this book. A couple of years ago, I talked to you about the assassination of JFK.
Right.
A group of Dallas citizens were very dissatisfied with what happened with the Warren Commission report. So we banded together, and over an 11-year period of time, we listened to everybody's story that wanted to bring one to us. Now, the official report came out, all the papers have been released and so forth, and it accumulated to be a big nothing. However, none of our facts were disputed, and the fact that there was no shooter on the grassy knoll was confirmed because the pathologists went into Kennedy's brain and were able to determine that yes, the head shot did come from the rear. But I have these books up here, and I'd be glad later on to answer any questions about the assassination, should you have some. Now let's talk about Slats Rogers. About 60, maybe 70 miles south of Dallas and a little west is the city of Cleburne, Texas. Now that's where Slats was raised. He had two older brothers. And if you've got two older brothers, that means that you survive and you're probably a pretty tough kid. And Slats was. Now, when he was 18 years old, he got crossways with his father, and he left home. And it was in the month of September, and cotton was being picked, so it was easy for him to get a job, and he fell in with some harvesters. And they wound up on a cotton plantation owned by a fellow named Tom Oliver, just a little south of Cleburne there. Now they worked from daylight till dusk. They got an hour off for lunch. And the Oliver family fed them and took care of them. They slept in the barn. It's always a big rush to get your cotton in because you don't want it to rain on it. So they go till it's all done, and it's back-breaking work. Some of you, I'm sure, pick cotton. I have, and I know you drag that heavy sack to the field master's wagon. He weighs it, he writes down in a little book beside your name how many pounds of cotton, and then when it's all harvested, you get paid. Now, Slats was involved in this, and he couldn't help but notice that Tom Oliver, the plantation owner, had a beautiful 15-year-old daughter. She had black shiny hair, bedroom eyes, childbearing hips, and Slats could hardly keep his eyes off of her. And she, in turn, was watching Slats. Now, Slats comes dragging his load of cotton in to be weighed, and Rosie, that's her name, Rosie Oliver, it's her job to stand by the water bucket, and as the boys bring their cotton in and it's being emptied into the wagon, she'll hand them a dipper of water. Of course, they're thirsty. They've been out there working in the sun. Well, Slats takes his drink of water and he hands it back to her, and he hadn't drank all of it, so she threw the water on him. And she dropped the dipper and ran around the wagon to stand by her father. Well, Slats peeked around the corner of the wagon, and Rosie stuck her tongue out at him. Now that night, the rest of the workers are asleep in the barn, and Slats props himself up on the barn door. He's sitting there watching the back of the farmhouse, hoping that Rosie will come out to empty the dishwater. She does. He moves like a jungle cat and gets between her and the kitchen door, and a soul-surrendering kiss is exchanged. Now, it's only a few days later, but these two kids elope, get married. Well, Tom Oliver, of course, is very upset. He's chagrined. Now, Slats is crossways with his father. The two kids decide that they'll catch the train into Dallas to see the fair. It's the fair season now. They spend the day in Dallas and they come back on the train, they get off in Cleburne. And they can't go to Rosie's home because it's rumored that Tom Oliver is looking for Slats with a shotgun. And of course, Slats is crossways with his father, so they're sitting there at the table as they eat their evening meal discussing their problem. Well, there's a gentleman who's alone there by himself, sitting close enough to him that he overhears what the problem is. He finishes his meal and introduces himself to Slats and Rosie. My name is J.D. Mullaney. I'm the yard superintendent for the Santa Fe Railroad here. And Mr. Rogers, if you're 21 years or older, if you'll come by tomorrow and get in that employment line, I'll see to it that you get a job. Well, of course, Slats showed up the next morning. The kids spent the night at the railroad boarding house there, and the next morning Slats got in the employment line, lied about his age, and got a job. Rosie, in the meantime, is hanging around the boarding house, and they ask her if she would like to be a chambermaid, and she accepts. And one of the amenities of being a chambermaid was if you wanted to, you could sleep in one of the rooms there if they weren't fairly occupied. So this solved their problems. And it was about 6 weeks, 2 months later, incidentally, Slats got a job. It's what they call a yard bird, a step and fetch, you know, go get this, go get that, hand me that tool. While that axle there, check the journals, so forth and so on. Just a general flunky, but he did what most ambitious railroad yard birds did. Every time he got a chance, he'd crawl up into the cab of one of those big locomotives and familiarize himself with the controls. And it wasn't long he was quite capable, if they needed a locomotive to move from one side of the yard to the other or to the roundhouse, he was able to guide it correctly and shut it down properly. But it's been about 6 weeks to 2 months he's working there, and the railroad workers go out on strike, and it's a Saturday morning, and they're waving their placards, "We've got to have more money." And they're complaining because the price of postage has gone from 1 cent to 2 cents. My God, the inflation has eaten them alive. They've just got to have more money. Well, what nobody notices is one of those big locomotives with the full head of steam has begun to inch forward. It wasn't shut down properly. Slats sees it moves and he immediately starts for it, and it breaks loose and it starts rumbling out of the yard, and it's all Slats can do to run fast enough to swing up into the cab of that locomotive, get those controls in line and shut it down. In the meantime, everybody in the yard there is watching him. They cheer and clap, and he backs it up, locks it down correctly, and comes down out of the cab. Now the next day when he's at work, he gets tapped on the shoulder, and one of his fellow workers says, "Mr. Mullaney wants to see you in his office." So Slats went to the railroad superintendent's office, knocked on the door. Mr. Mullaney motioned for him to come in and said, "Have a seat, Slats." He offered him a cigar. He finished the paperwork he was doing. He said, "Mr. Rogers, you did the railroad a great favor Saturday when you caught that engine and kept it from being a runaway locomotive. You see, it was headed out. It would have gone right out on the main line. And coming in the opposite direction was a train, and our friend Calvin Coolidge was on that train. It would have been not only very costly to have a head-on collision, but very embarrassing. So the Home Office has advised me to help you get any job with the railroad that you'd like to strike for. Of course, you can't have my job, but anything else you'd like to have." Well, Slats knew exactly what he wanted to be. He wanted to be an engineer and drive one of those big trains. Now, Slats Rogers as a boy was fascinated with kites. It was always his kite that would fly the highest and the best, and when he was 14, he built a kite that resembled one of our hang gliders. He had a neighbor boy bring a carriage, and they hooked up a clothesline with that kite, and Slats hung on to it and got up about 40 feet in the air and traveled a little over half a mile. He knew after he got that sensation that flying was for him, and when the Wright brothers built their plane, he went parabolic, spent time in the library, studied everything, drafted his own pictures of what he would like to build, because this was his life mission, to have an airplane. Now he's running this locomotive from Cleburne, Texas to Falls Valley, Oklahoma every day, well, 5 days a week. He leaves early in the morning, he gets to Paul's Valley around noon, and he gets back to Cleburne about dusk. He'd been making this run for about 2 weeks. He and his firemen are eating at the boarding house there in Paul's Valley that the railroad has. They've been coming in there every day for about 2 weeks. And as they're eating their meal, this big Indian comes in. He's got on a leather jacket and a white Stetson hat with a turkey feather sticking out the back. He sits down across the two men, turns his chair around, and is leaning there just watching the meat, not saying a word. Slats finishes his meal, wipes his lip, and says, "Can I help you, Chief?" Chief says, "We need drinking whiskey." And Slats says, "Oh no," said, "we can't bring whiskey into Oklahoma." Said, "That's against the law." And if we did, we of course would lose our jobs and we'd have to go to jail. It would be a very dangerous thing to bring whiskey into Oklahoma. Chief grunted and said, "I'll pay cash." Slats thought for a moment. He knew he could buy whiskey by the case in Fort Worth for $10 a case. And he said, "Chief, I'll bring you a case of whiskey, but it'll cost you $120. Chief said, "Bring two." So Slats brought 2 cases of whiskey the next time he came to Paul's Valley, and the word got out, and it was soon he and his firemen hardly had room in the cab of that locomotive because there were so many cases of whiskey in there. Well, Slats was making much, much more money moving that whiskey than he was working for the railroad, but it gave him the capital that he needed to order parts and get the correct lumber and canvas to build an airplane, and this was his life's mission. Now, all the people at the Santa Fe Railroad there in Cleburne were enthused about his idea. They knew about it. The technical engineers there helped him with his designs, made sure that everything was balanced, and the plane was built. Now, it was built in a vacant warehouse downtown Cleburne, and after it was assembled, they started the motor, and it ran out fine. And there was a Mr. Miller who had a farm just outside of town, and he offered Slats, he said, "You can put your plane in my barn, and I've got a pasture," said, "all my cattle have been sold," said, "you can use that pasture, take off and landings." Now here's a young man, he's 19 years old now. There's no manual of flight instructions, there's no instructor, but he's got this airplane built, and it's one of those pusher planes where the pilot sits out front and he's got that steering wheel and the motor and the propeller behind him. Slats practiced for 6 weeks trying to learn to taxi that thing. He broke several wheels, he boogered up the end of the wings, but finally after 6 weeks he was able to taxi in a straight line. I don't know how many of you are pilots, but if you will remember, that was definitely the most difficult part. It's worse than learning how to ride a bicycle. Anyway, he's finally able to taxi it. And there's one Saturday morning, he gets up early in the morning and he's taxiing right straight down the field, and he just can't get it off the ground. So by that afternoon, he's tired. And he parks his plane up on the top of a kind of a hill there and goes to sleep in the shade of a wing. While he's sleeping there, 2 boys from Fort Worth on a motorcycle come down the road, and of course seeing an airplane would be like a flying saucer landed out here in our parking area. And they're curious, so they circle around, they get into the pasture and come down, shut their motorbike down. Slats wakes up and sees them, motions for them to come on over. They come over, but they take a fifth of whiskey out of their saddlebag as they're coming over. And the 3 men sit there and finish off that fifth of whiskey under the shade of that airplane wing. Now Slats is wide awake and he's got his stomach full of that false courage. So he tells these 2 guys, he said, "Look, I'm having trouble getting this plane off the ground. What I want you to do is each one of you stand at the end of the wing and hold on to it while I rev up the engine. When I give you a thumbs up, turn it loose." So they do this. Now the plane is going further and faster down the field than it ever has, and Slats realizes there's a ditch at the end of the field that he didn't know about. Fortunately, right before you got to the ditch, there was a little mound of dirt. The plane hit the mound of dirt, bounced, and it was airborne. So Slats is going now, and he's up about 40 feet in the air, and he decides that he's going to turn the plane and he turns the steering wheel and he almost crashes. So you gotta bank the plane, you can't just throw that rudder over like that. So he almost crashes and he straightens up, and about that time he runs out of gas. Fortunately, he's been running it all day and there's not much gas left. He comes down hard in the cornfield, and again, fortunately, he's going the same direction as the corn rows, so there's not much damage done. He walks to the farmer's house whose field he's in, borrows a mule and drags his plane back to the barn where he's keeping it. Now there are 4 or 5 people that saw him fly, and they go into town, they go into the barber shop, the drugstore, the lumberyard. That crazy fool got that plane off the ground, and the word went out all over town. Somebody called the newspapers. The next morning, the newspapers are at Slats' house. They want to know when he's going to fly again. Now, it's in the month of October. He said, I will fly next Saturday morning, first light. You see, first light, when the sun first comes up, there's no heat thermals, there's not much wind. This is the perfect time to fly. So if you can imagine, it's October 14th, on a Saturday, the year is 1917, there are over 5,000 people in that pasture. They have roped off the runway. The high school band is there playing John Philip Sousa music. Somebody has put up a tent and they're serving coffee and donuts. Now Slats has been experimenting with mixing a little ether with his gasoline. And he cranks his plane up, and that is a real lethal type of fuel, and it backfires and a big ball of fire rolls out across the prairie, and of course everybody in the stands falls back. But he has 2 of his friends hold the plane, he revs up the engine, he gets it going, he goes down the field, hits the little mound, bumps, and he's airborne. Now he remembers that he almost crashed when he tried to turn it the last time. So he flies off out of sight. And he's remembered seeing the buzzards, how they lay over on one side and come around. So he uses his ailerons as well as his rudder, and this time he's able to turn it perfectly. He makes about 3 circles. He comes back to the field, waves at all the people below him, circles around and comes in for a perfect 3-point landing. Flash bulbs popped, newspaper people take his story, and this big broad-shouldered guy wearing a leather jacket edges his way through the crowd and comes up there. He is the sheriff running for sheriff over in Ellis County, which is not too far away. And his campaign manager explains to Slats, we're having a political rally at the courthouse at Waxahachie. Now, a lot of you are probably familiar with that courthouse in Waxahachie. That is a beautiful structure.
Beautiful old building.
Yes. And we would like to have you, Mr. Rogers, fly over about 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. What would you charge us to do that? Slats just reaches up, $600, and that would be a fortune in 1917. I mean, you could buy a Model T Ford for $176, so that'll kind of get you in time there. In any event, the campaign manager said, Mr. Rogers said, all the money we've got in the world is $475. That says, fine, I'll do it for $475. So the date is set, and it's the next Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, which is a little later than Slats would like to be flying. But he agreed to that, and now he is worried because that steeple at that courthouse is 200 feet high, and he doesn't know if he can get high enough to get over the steeple. But he does. And he circles around and waves at the crowd, and it's a big success, and he comes back and lands at his field, and 5 people approach him. And these 5 people are with the woodmen of the world, and they're having a picnic just down the river, and they want Slats to fly over their picnic. He said, no, it's too late today. He said, the heat thermals have built up there, gusts of wind, says it's much too dangerous. Well, Mr. Rogers, we'd accumulated the $600 if you wanted to fly the Hogan. So he gets his plane off the ground, and sure enough, the wind catches him and he crashes. Now, the mortality rate with those pusher-type planes was almost 100% because the motor comes down and crushes the pilot. Slats was aware of this, so he had arranged his harness so he could pull one strap and be released and roll out. And this worked perfectly. The only problem was the radiator burst and he was badly scalded with hot water. Now, he said that he could remember they gave him a lot of laudanum, but he was unconscious, but even through the darkness, he could still feel the pain. When he finally woke up, he was in Parkland Hospital, and the doctor told him, he said, "You're very lucky." He said, "The burns will heal," but he said, "You have a cracked vertebra. You almost broke your neck." Anyway, in 6 weeks, Slats was out of the hospital, Parkland Hospital here in Dallas. But the hospital cadre was never so glad to see a patient leave as they were to see Slats Rogers leave. You see, the railroad workers would come, 5 were allowed in the room at a time, and they'd come in groups of 5. And they'd always have a big bouquet of roses, and down inside that big bouquet of roses would be a fifth of whiskey. Well, they'd get in his room and they'd start passing that around, and of course they'd get more and more ruckus. The nurse would come in and try and calm them down, and they would always insist that the nurse take a drink with them. So they were glad to see Slats leave, and when he got out, war had been declared. We were involved in war with Germany. And he went immediately to, they didn't have an Air Force, but they had the communication and observation corps where they had these big balloons. And he talked to a major there, and he told the major, he said, "My plan is to take my plane and fly over the enemy and drop dynamite on them." Well, the major thought that was a good idea, and they let Slats in the Army, but when they found out that he knew how to fly, they made an instructor out of him and sent him to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And he didn't get to shoot at the Germans or drop any dynamite on them. He had to stay up there and train the cadets. He made a lot of friends. He was that kind of guy. Now, when the war was over, right here in Dallas, Love Field had been built, and it was a state-of-the-art aerodrome. They had solid Bermuda grass all through the field. The runways were gravel, so when it rained, they didn't get too muddy. They had 11 hangars. 6 of them were devoted to storage airplanes. There was one for commissary, one for an infirmary, and then they had a great number of airplanes that were uncrated. They're still in new crates. But the war's over. And the commandant there at Love Field says, "Well, we're going to have a flying frolic." Now, a flying frolic, it was his idea. He wanted to raise $600 so they could build a swimming pool for the cadets. And he put out word to all the nearby military air bases that were within flying distance, "Fly in, because we're going to spend a weekend. We're going to have mock dog fights. We're going to have gunnery competition. We're going to have bombing competition. We're going to shoot down a couple of balloons." Said, "We're going to have a big time." So the word went out and the pilots came in. Now, in the meantime, a carnival made the contract with Love Field. They set up grandstands. They brought in elephants and lions and tigers. And the night before the airplanes were supposed to get in, somehow the elephants got out. So these pilots are coming in from all over Texas, and they see these elephants on the runway. They say a lot of them quit drinking right there. But the flying frolic took place, and Slats had his own personal airplane, and he took advantage of it. He parked it over by the grandstands, and he put up a sign that said, "Ride $25. Now, he could get 2 other people in the plane, so he made $50 every time he went up. And he got up about 200 feet in the air, flew out over Bachman Lake, came back and landed. At the end of the day, he had over $1,100, which was a small fortune, and he realized there was money to be made with flying circuses. So he got hold of all the military pilots that were, of course, looking for jobs and unemployed, and they started scheming and conniving about what they could do, all the parachute jumps and whatnot. In the meantime, the federal government sent out an edict to all military air bases, burned all the airplanes. You see, they are dangerous. And the war's over, the government has no use for them. They don't want people flying them and then perhaps suing the government because something went wrong. So let's just burn all the airplanes. Well, Slats Rogers and a fellow by the name of B.B. Owens here in Dallas, that may be a familiar name to some of you. He was married 5 different times and became a millionaire in the oil business, and he gave a lot of money to the Salvation Army. In any event, Slats and B.B. Owens conspire, and they propositioned the commandant at Love Field. They said, we will buy all the airplanes that you're about to burn for $100 apiece on a consignment basis. And if you will proposition Washington D.C. and get permission for this, said you'll make money instead of burning the planes. The deal went through. And what you could do right after the war, you could go out to Love Field and buy one of those old Jennies for $200. And you got 4 hours of instruction, then you could fly it home. There's a picture in the book of a fellow in Richardson, Texas, and his granddaughter gave me this story. He bought 2 of these planes. There's a picture of one of the planes landed by the house. It's in a cotton field. You can see the cotton growing up around it. But they could land these things almost anywhere it was flat. Anyway, he bought 2 of them. The reason he bought 2 of them is because he is a bootlegger. And he's got one hidden in his barn, the other one's out in plain sight. And you see, he takes off first light every morning. Or not every morning, but whenever he needs sugar for his still. And he'll go to Waxahachie, Waco, some other place, and buy sugar. Because one of the main way the revenuers caught the bootleggers, they'd hang around where there was sugar for sale, and if somebody bought a large amount of sugar, so they'd follow him to see where his still was. Well, of course, they could follow him out to the nearest pasture where he had his plane. He'd take off, and there's no way they could follow him. So they didn't know where he's going. And he'd always come back just at dusk. And this went along pretty good for a little over a year. He was a member of the First Baptist Church there in Richardson. And one of his good church buddies found out what was going on and ratted him out. Now, he got put in jail and sent to Huntsville. Now, this is all taking place when Pa Ferguson was governor. And he recollected and told his granddaughter, he said, my first day, he said, I was out chopping cotton with the rest of the convicts, and this Model T truck drives up, and a fella comes over and says, Mr. Ferguson wants to see you, he's in that truck. So he goes to the truck. Now the family from Richardson came here from Kentucky, and they brought some fine thoroughbred horses with them, and their horses always won first place at the state fair. So Governor Ferguson is sitting there in that Model T truck, and he says, I have an animal back at the barn that I'd like your opinion of, if you'll ride back with me. So the 2 men rode back to the barn, and here is a mule about 40 years old. You can see all these ribs, he's got a way back, he's only got one eye. The governor says, well, what do you think that mule is worth? And our pilot friend said, well, I don't think he's worth the cartridge it takes to put him out. The governor says, well, that's where you're wrong. Says that mule is worth $1,000. And the reason it's worth $1,000 is because whoever gets on it, that mule goes right straight to the railroad station. The railroad conductor realizes that the man that's on that mule is going to go back to his home and write me a check for $1,000, and he's going to get a pardon. So the deal goes through, and the man from Richardson, of course, comes back to Richardson, but he doesn't try to bootleg anymore. Now, this story came from the granddaughter, and I've got his picture there in the book. Now, Slats he puts together this flying circus, and let's say that we're in McKinney, and just about 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, these 3 Jennies will come over just treetop level, and of course those engines are just roaring. They're flying right down Main Street. Well, of course, everybody comes out to see what in the world's going on, and they're throwing flyers out. The guy in the back seat's throwing flyers out, and they come floating down, and it's saying Sunday morning after church, in Mr. Sebastian's property, these planes will be there. We're going to have parachute jumps. We're going to have mock dog fights, loop-to-loops, all kinds of acrobatics, and there will be rides for those of you that would like to ride in an airplane. So, of course, Sunday after church, everybody is out there at Mr. Sebastian's property. Now, in addition to the flying circus, what Slats has done, all these planes have got a tank full of bootleg whiskey, and they're back there turning that on and selling it to the crowd. And they're making much more money than selling the whiskey. In fact, Slats was approached by a fellow by the name of Benny Binion. Some of you may recognize that name. Benny Binion was the #1 mob boss and bootlegger here in Dallas, and he approached Slats and he said, "Slats, Dallas is lapping this up faster than we can make it. And I have a plan I want to talk to you about." And the two men schemed and connived, and this is what they did. They bought 5 rent houses in Oak Cliff that are right side by side. Then they had a master plumber come in there and make a giant still out of all these houses, capable of producing 400 gallons of bourbon a day.
Good night.
But there is a problem, because you see the fumes from this create a smell, and bourbon dealers get that, and they just follow their nose, and they come right to you. So what they do, they pipe the fumes down into the sewer. And some of the folks in Oak Cliff, every time they flush their commode, here comes this squid. It comes up out of the commode. Well, that went on for a while. Well, finally, Roosevelt gets elected in 1932, and he ends Prohibition, and that party is over with. One of the issues is that Slats had to surrender his license several times till he got his fines paid for what he did. And probably the most outstanding thing that he did as far as being mischievous, he's been playing poker and drinking all night long. He and 2 of his compadres take off, and they're going to buzz Dallas. Well, the first thing they do, they start flying under the Oak Cliff viaduct. And they're flying under, of course, traffic stops and starts backing up because, you know, everybody's running over this side and watching them come out that side. Well, they get through doing that, and they go up. Now, the Baker Hotel has not been built yet. And the Magnolia Building is on one side of Concord, and the Adolphus Hotel is on the other. And these 3 men are up probably about 2,000 feet. They look down there, and they can see the silhouette of those 2 buildings. And Slats points down like this, he's going to fly between them. The guy in the echelon on his left goes, I'm not. The guy on the right, no, I'm not here. Slats, of course, is, well, one fellow told me that I interviewed out there at Love Field. He said, when I knew when Slats Rogers was going to come into Love Field, I'd leave. He said if there were hangar doors open at both ends, said that guy would fly right through the hangars.
Good.
Said he would get up and do tail spins and pull out about 4 feet above the ground. He said it just was not, is he going to explode and blow up, just when? Anyway, Slats is going to fly between the Magnolia Building and the Adolphus Hotel. Well, he does a loop to begin with because those old Jennies, the maximum speed you could get is on the back side of that loop. And the faster they're going, the more accurately you can control them. So he comes running down, roaring down out of this loop, and he flies between the 2 buildings. He sucks out all the windows on the 6th floor of the Adolphus Hotel. The pigeons just fly up, you know, they're building out there, and the pigeons get into the carburetor of his airplane, and it shuts down, and he has to make a forced landing on down Akron. Well, of course, telephones are ringing and sirens are going off, and fortunately, Bill Decker, Deputy Decker, and Slats are good friends, so Decker gets there first, and he knocks on the side of the cup and says, "Slats, are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine, Decker." "Well, come on down out of there. I gotta take you to jail." So he handcuffs him and takes him to jail. He's supposed to appear at 10 o'clock the next morning in front of the grand jury. He does, and he's all dressed in his flying leathers and his pants. He's got that white scarf on. He's got his helmet and goggles under one hand and a stick in the other, and he swaggers in there. And the district attorney really gives him what for, because he has endangered lives and property downtown Dallas, yada, yada, yada. Finally, the judge says, "Well, Mr. Rogers, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Slats says, "Yes, I do, Judge." He stood up and he said, "First of all, I want you to know it was not dangerous." He said, "The morning before I flew between those 2 buildings, I was having coffee in Webb's Coffee Shop, which is on the ground floor of the Magnolia Building. I walked out there and stepped off the distance between the 2 buildings. Judge, I had 4 feet to spare on both sides, but it was not dangerous." He said, "And furthermore," said, "I did the city of Dallas a great favor. He said, I don't know how many of those pesky pigeons that have been pooping all over the street in the Adolphus Hotel I killed with my plane. The judge is hammering up there on his, Mr. Rogers, that'll be enough. Your fine is $300. Slats reaches into his pocket. He comes out with an obscene roll of money, all $100 bills. And he's counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the judge starts pounding on the gavel. Mr. Rogers, your fine is $300. I know, Judge, but I'm gonna give you $600 and go out there and fly between those two buildings again. Well, he got put in jail for 30 days for contempt of court. But that probably was his most flamboyant deed. Now, bootlegging is over, and he turns to running guns into Mexico.
Oh, no.
And he's running guns down there, and that's pretty good, except all of a sudden they decide that the Mexican bandits want 2 Browning water-cooled machine guns. Those things weigh about 600 pounds apiece, and the ammunition is just, that's another problem. Well, Slats says, no, I'm not going to bring you any water-cooled machine guns. He said, those things kill a lot of people quick. And if there's some incident using those machine guns, they're going to want to know where you got them, and I'll be in big trouble. So the Mexicans go off and they have an ad hoc meeting. They come back and they say, well, we want you to know what we're going to do with those machine guns. Maybe you'll change your mind. We're going to hold up a trainload of gold. You see, the oil workers in Tampico are demanding gold for their payment. The inflation is so bad. And every week, there's a trainload of gold that leaves Mexico to pay them. And the bandit that's going to rob the train, his brother is the commandant of the soldiers that protect the train. And all we're going to do with those machine guns, they have to come through this ravine. We're going to set up the machine guns on both sides of the track and fire over the train, not killing anybody, not damaging any property. The commandant of the soldiers, knowing what's going on and being in on it, is going to tell his soldiers, we are surrounded, we're outgunned, we're going to surrender. And we'll come in and offload the gold. And you can have half of it if you'll go along with us. Slats said, okay. So the deal was set up. Now Slats knows they're going to kill him. There's no doubt in his mind about it. So he has a plan. And here's what happens, if you can imagine. The train is coming up grade into this canyon. There is a Mexican bandit disguised like a railroad worker, and he's out there waving those red flags to stop the train. The train stops. The machine gun fire opens up. The commandant tells the soldiers to get out and lay down their arms and hold up their hands. They do as they're told. Now Slats and the bandits both have a wagon, and they're driving down the side of the ravine there to offload the gold into their wagon. Slats knows that somewhere between where he is now and that train, there will be a sniper or some way they're going to kill him. So this is his plan. Just about the time those wagons get rolling, there are 3 World War I, incidentally, I forgot to tell you, he bought up every World War I airplane he could get his hands on and fixed them up to suit himself. But they're the de Havilland B-3s that have got the gunner in the back seat, machine gun. 3 of those come roaring over just at treetop level. And they're firing right down the railroad track behind the train, and of course, gravel and cleats jumping up, and every now and then a bullet hits the steel rail and sparks are flying. Well, all the horses that the bandits are on, of course, are rearing and bolting and running away. The bandits, the soldiers that were holding up their hands run into the forest to hide. Don't forget, Slats Rogers knows how to drive one of these trains. He walks down there, gets up into the cab, throws that sucker in reverse and backs down about 3 miles where there's a flat field where he's got some more airplanes landed. They offload the gold into the airplanes and fly it back into Texas. Well, he gets back into Texas, and the banker there was one of his students, and they're in cahoots, so the gold is put into the bank and nobody knows where it went. The banker explains to him that the airfield there at McAllen, the man that owns it, is in poor health and that he can probably buy it if he's interested in buying an airfield. It's exactly what Slats was. He's got all these World War I airplanes and he's remodeling, and so he buys the airport there. And he makes friends with one of the local citrus growers. They grow grapefruit right across the river. And he and his friend in the citrus business are drinking one night. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. And this guy starts crying. And Slats asked him, he said, well, what's the matter? He said, my citrus crop is just about to be harvested. My notes due at the bank, I'll make enough to pay off with the citrus crop. But the red bugs are into my citrus fruit, and they're ruining my crop. Slats takes a couple more drinks, and he says, tell you what you do. Build a big bonfire at the north end and a big bonfire at the south end of your orchard. Have it ready by first light. So Slats then goes back to his airport and he gets hold of his ace mechanic, a fellow named Shot Smith, a little short guy about that high. And in World War I, he got the top of his ear shot off. They called him Shot Smith. He says, Shot, says, I want you to take the bottom out of the front seat of one of those Jennies. I want you to put a corn sheller up on the side of it. Then he got hold of one of his students who owned a drugstore, and they rounded up all the cyanide they could get hold of. So by first light in the morning, Slats is flying over that orchard. Shot Smith is up in the front seat dumping bags of cyanide in there into the corn sheller grinder, and they dusted the orchard. And they killed all the red bugs. Slats told the orchard owner, he said, you be sure and wash that fruit real good before you sell it. So anyway, they got the harvest and they got the guy out of it, and the county agent there in that county, Zapata County, found out about it. He came out and looked at the plane and interviewed Slats. He was very impressed. He wrote a letter off to Washington, D.C. explaining what happened. Somebody up there gave it to a newspaper and the word goes out. Now Slats is getting calls from other orchard owners. They're getting calls from the cotton farmers wanting to know, well, does he have something to kill boll weevils and leaf worms? Boy, just overnight, he has got an agro dusting business there. And he's got all those World War I planes, and they develop a better way than corn shellers to distribute the dust. So he has made a fortune in the crop dusting business. Now, he's getting old. He's approaching 60 now. His eyesight's not what it was. He has a couple of bad landings that are near-death experiences, and he decides he better quit flying, so he buys a ranch. And the ranch is over at Bandera, Texas, and he's going to raise some sheep. Big mistake. Slats is not cut out to be a rancher. So he decides that he's going to sell the ranch. About that time, the IRS calls on him and says, you owe us a great deal of money because you sold that airport. Now we want our part. And of course, he's already spent the money. He bought the ranch and all the sheep. So he says, well, you can have the ranch and the sheep. And the IRS says, we don't want your ranch and sheep. We want money. Slats says, will you take my note? He said, yep. So he signs a note for what he owes him. He builds a barbecue place on the ranch. And within the barbecue place, there's room for 3 nice stables. And within 6 months, he's made enough money in his casino to pay off the government. Now, Slats dies of natural causes only a few years later, but before he dies, he builds a little airport. They built that new Lake Falcon down there. And he built some cabins. He called it the Lakefront Lodge. They're still in business. You can go down there today, and the landing strip is still there, where people would fly in and they could fish the new Lake Falcon. But that's the story of Slats Rogers, and none of it is fabricated. It all came from when I attended the dedication of the Texas Historical Marker in McAllen, Texas. And there's a picture of it on the back of the book with all the Love Field Lunatics, members of the flying circus on there. But when they dedicated that, I like to go to the dedications of these Texas historical markers because, you know, I've got a passion for history. Anyway, I'm there and I meet Slats' granddaughter. And we're talking, and I told her I knew who Slats Rogers was. My family would have picnics at Bottom Lake, and these old Jennies would come flying in, and I'd wave at the pilots, and every time someone would wave back, Dad knew Slats, and he said, well, that was probably Slats. So I knew who Slats was, and we were talking. She said, well, if you'd like to write a book about him, said, I've got all the newspaper clippings, I've got his helmet and goggles, and I'll be glad to help you. So that's where the information comes from. That's just like it happened right here in Dallas. I want to thank you so much. I've got some of my history books up here. Any book up here is $20. Take your pick. And of course, we got the one on Slats Rogers. Tom, thank you so much for having me again.
Who wants to be first?
When's the movie?
When does the movie come out?
I have a screenplay written for it.
Good.
Oh,
But the problem is, a low-budget movie is $5 million. And I can't find that sugar daddy, that angel.
Make it great.
Sugar daddy.
So first question, you never explained where the name Slats came from.
The name Slats came to him because Slats is a little over 6 feet tall, and he always was kind of humped over. And they said, look, that guy looks just like a slat out of a barrel.
Are any of those Jennies around? Do they have them in the museum up here? Is
The
there
Jennies?
any of the planes? Yeah.
There's one at Love Field, I've seen it,
Yeah.
at that flight museum.
Is there any recognition at Love Field, like a historical marker, or?
Oh, what a beautiful question. I'm so glad you asked that. I have tried to get my book in their bookstore out there, but the books are handled by a Chicago franchise. So I sent them a copy of the book and I said, you know, this is the natural people coming through there. They ignore me.
Well, you know, I know a little bit about that, Dallas. That's Dallas for you, and I'm sorry to hear it, but this
Isn't that
is
the
just
truth?
awesome. This is the most awesome thing, so thank you.
Yeah,
God.
it is
This
Dallas.
great. Yeah, it's a Dallas, you know, they say a prophet is never realized in his own town, and, you know, there's some of the greatest storytellers and musicians and artists. They get known all over the world, but here it's just, I don't know, it's just strange. It's,
Well, I'll let you in on one of my plans. Right now I'm writing a book about a fellow named Warren Diamond. Warren Diamond was the czar of gambling here during the gay 90s and roaring 20s. Now when I complete that book, I'll have books all the way from the gay 90s to the assassination of Kennedy. That will be the spine for a TV sitcom, and I will write it and try and sell it. Thanks, sir.
Did you say that he founded Love Field?
No, he didn't found Love Field. He just ran it.
Tom? How did Love Field get the name Love?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
How did Love Field get its name, Love Field?
There was a sergeant, or excuse me, a Lieutenant Love that was killed in an air crash in California. And it was the Army's custom that anytime one of their men died, if possible, they would name an airfield after him.
Before somebody grabs it.
He wants this book.
Kennedy,
Oh,
can I?
you want a book?
Yeah, the Kennedy
Oh,
book.
sure.
Here.
It's the only one left, I think.
What was Slats' real name?
Floyd H. Rogers.
Floyd.
Floyd H. Rogers.
Floyd A.
H.
What was the plane made of mostly? What was it? Was it a metal plane or
Oh,
what?
no, the planes were wood and canvas.
Candace.
Wood and, yeah. I think Tom goes by sleds.
Yeah, real kites. Don't slow.
How did the planes get that name? Jennies?
Say again?
Why were the planes named Jennies? What did you call them, Jennies?
Yes, I have no idea.
Was that like a girl's name, Jennies? Okay, somebody named Jenny.
Maybe somebody's girlfriend.
Thank you, sir.
Somebody's girlfriend. So Slat married that girl, right?
Slats married Rosie, they had 4 children, they got a divorce. Then after he bought the airfield down there at McAllen, He had a paper route. He'd fly out and drop papers for the ranchers. And every time he'd take off, these kids would be standing out there waving at him, 2 kids in front of his house. So Christmas time, he'd drop some candy for them. And then he gets an invite to come to the house. And there's the children's mother, a very shapely divorcee. And he marries her. And those 2 children's pictures are in the book.
Oh, okay. Well, he's a man who can't say no. What a guy.
How large was the plane? You said it held 3 people?
Yes, the pilot, and then there was room for 2 people in the rear cockpit.
Isn't that the Jenny Lee? Isn't that the Jenny there?
Yes, that's the Jenny. The Jenny, there's 2 Jennies on the front of the book.
Yeah, that's
That Jenny had a top speed of about 90 miles an hour, no wind, flying straight, and a range of about 200 miles when they could get gas. Thank you.
When Slats built his plane, did he have some kind of a plan, or did he just wing it and put this
Well,
thing together?
Slats drew a plan that was very similar to Curtis Wright's pusher at that time. They called it pusher plane. And his was very similar, except he made some modifications that he thought would be aerodynamically correct. And of course, the one very important modification he made was in the harness that held the pilot in, because he was able to release his when the plane crashed. That plane had almost 100% mortality whenever it crashed.
Safety modifications.
okay. Do you have a favorite story or book that you wrote of your children?
Can't hear you.
Do
Of
you
all my
have a
books-
favorite?
Oh, yes. My favorite is the Dallas Citizens report on the JFK assassination. On the back of the book is a picture of the second gunman. Nobody else has ever found that second gunman. He was the Dallas County Deputy Sheriff. He was put on top of the county records building by Sheriff Bill Decker to protect the president of the motorcade. His very instructions, the man's name is Harry Weatherford. And Decker's very words to him was, "Harry, if you see any mischief, you just take the people out that are causing it." This was the best shot in the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. And when Oswald fired that headshot, the first shot Oswald fired, Deputy Weatherford saw the pigeons fly up off the top of the school book depository, but he had no target. He is almost directly behind Oswald. When Oswald fired that second deadly headshot, he saw the muzzle flash in the 6th floor window. He swung his rifle around. He could not get Oswald into his sights. He could see the tip of Oswald's rifle. Now, the president is down out of sight. Governor Connolly is down out of sight. What is Oswald going to shoot at? There is Jacqueline scrambling out over the back of a limousine. The mafia's way are to kill the man, the wife, the children, the dog, and burn the house. Oswald is going to kill Jacqueline with that third shot. Fortunately for Jacqueline, Harry Weatherford, the deputy sheriff on top of the county record building, fires at Oswald's rifle. The 2 shots are almost simultaneous. Oswald flinches back as Weatherford's bullet impacts the building just before his fingers tighten up to squeeze. As a result, Oswald's third shot goes high, completely missing the motorcade, hitting the curb on the south side of Elm Street. And there's a witness whom they flew to Washington to tell the Warren Commission, "I was standing on the curb on the south side of Elm Street. The bullet impacted right by my feet. A chip of concrete cut my cheek, and I heard the bullet ricochet on into the steel girders of the triple underpass." That was Oswald's third shot. Now, The summation that I heard, since everything is out, they're saying that Oswald missed the first shot. They don't know what they're talking about. We've accounted for all 3 shots. But the people of Dallas just didn't sit idly by. They put together their own assassination review board.
Any other questions? Okay, you get to sit down.
Thank you, thank you.
Now it's your turn to talk, so anybody want to get up here and comment on what his head said, either for or against, your choice, come on. You're next.
Well, I knew nothing about him before this presentation, so I have really no comment to make one way or the other, but a little more about Love Field. I don't know if too many of you are too familiar with aviation and the airplanes and so forth and the development, but in World War II, the greatest fighter plane built to go up quickly and attack incoming bombers was the British Spitfire. It could climb like a rocket, and it was excellent for that. The airplane that turned out to be the best for the long-range support of bombers that flew over into Germany was the P-51 Mustang.
Yeah.
The first one of those was flown out here at Love Field, and they produced them out there for a while, and other places. And during the Korean War, of course we know they had the MiG-15 jet and the F-86 Sabre jet, but the preferred aircraft for air combat between aircraft was the P-51 Mustang, and 5 different nations flew that airplane during the Korean War. And the reason was it could turn a lot sharper and climb right there in the immediate area a lot faster, and the jets had to make these long swooping turns. They were not good for dogfighting. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I think one area where I would tend to disagree with you on, from the little that I've heard, I of course haven't read your book, is about the Kennedy assassination. I think that there's a lot of controversy on that will go on for a long time. And yeah, I mean, it's been so well obfuscated by the people who want to keep it covered up. But a lot of the people that were here at the time in city government and so forth, I wouldn't trust them with a 10-foot pole. And I think a lot of them were in on the crime, and particularly the cover-up. For instance, years ago I was watching the Geraldo Rivera show, in which he had 2 nights of analysis of the Kennedy assassination with forensic scientists. And I was sitting with a friend watching the 2, and it showed the Zapruder film, and it showed the car coming down, and all of a sudden, excuse me, all of a sudden there was this gray mist behind Kennedy's throat that went up in an angle about, I'd say, 20 or 30 degrees. And it was like a little conical shape, and then it blew away in the wind, and immediately Kennedy is clutching his throat. And I bolted up in my chair and I said to my friend, did you see that? That first shot came from in front of him and lower than him, because it was on a path upwards. It had to come from the sewer drain, the opening there. Well, she didn't see that, but then they played it again that evening, and she saw that. So the next morning, I picked her up and we drove down there, and the second sewer opening of 2 was in perfect position for that shot to have been fired. And then I called up friends all over town and said, you got to watch this tonight, because they're going to replay it all. The second night had the mist erased from the film on the Geraldo Rivera show. Talk about cover-up. Somebody saw that and said, whoa, we got to cover that up.
Covered up storm sewer too.
Yes. Years later, I had finished up at the courthouse with a client, and we were going to go out to lunch. And I told him this story, and we were driving down Elm Street there, and I said, now here's the first opening, and here's there is no second opening now. And we parked the car, got out and went down there, and the concrete that they used to fill it in looks as old as any concrete on that street. They did a beautiful job of that. And where the manhole cover was over that, they had put a lamp post. Now, years later, I was playing soccer. I played in the men's league here for a long time. And one of my teammates was a sergeant on the tax squad with the police department. After one of the games, we were talking in his hot tub, getting wrinkles out and so forth. And I mentioned this to him, and he said, well, they told us at the police department that they removed that storm sewer opening to quell speculation that a shot could have come from it. City of Dallas is up to its ears in the cover-up. And in one case that I had, where I had my life threatened because the case threatened to expose the fact that in 1978 the Dallas Narcotics Division was trying to muscle the mafia out of heroin trade in Dallas and take it over from themselves, verified by an intelligence officer from the police department and verified by a friend who worked for a mafia-owned nightclub on Harry Hines who talked one night to his boss. They knew all about it. But they said these officers are stupid and they're going to fall on their face, so we're just letting them do their thing and then we'll take over again, which they did. But I went to Henry Wade's office and I said, this is the thing, and I'm sure my man is not guilty of that. It was planted on him like he says. I would like for you to send him over, and I forget the name, but it was a private polygraph expert. Sit down, just a second. It's only 3 minutes anyway. To have him analyzed with a polygraph, and Henry Wade said, well, we can do that, but let the police do it first. And I said, well, you know what's going to be the result of that? They're going to say that he's lying. Well, let them do it first. So, of course, the police department did their polygraph and it said he was lying. I went back to Henry Wade's office and said, now can we use your private polygraph expert so-and-so? I don't have a private polygraph expert, and from now on, you talk to my associates. Don't you come to this office anymore. About 6 feet away, he had his brass spittoon, and he goes like that. Splatters the wall and the floor like he always did every day. A woman would come in every day and mop it all up. He was a disgusting liar up to his ears in the Kennedy assassination, in my opinion.
I would say something good. Yeah, a couple of interesting, actually, Albert mentioned the Mustang. Well, that was the result of an order placed by the British just before the war. They came up with this design and procurement for the Mustang. And of course, partly it was built in Dallas, another part was built in California. So, but talking about strange airplanes, actually, you know, people know I have a house in London in High Barnet, on the edge of London. Well, 2 miles north of that is a little building called Hatfield House. Well, that's an interesting place. It's now a museum, but before the war, de Havilland, Roger de Havilland, whose sister was Olivia de Havilland, by the way, he was head of the airplane company called de Havilland in Hatfield, which is a little bit further north. So they went to the Air Ministry in the late 1930s and said, well, we have this proposal for a wooden aeroplane, and you know, it would be with 2 engines. And so the aircraft ministry said, go away, you idiots! Don't you know that airplanes aren't made with the wooden canvas anymore? You know, there's stress steel. So in fact, Geoffrey de Havilland went back and said, well, to hell with them, we're going to build this anyway. So they then bought this little manor house, and it was quite small, and they put the design team in it. And they built this aircraft, which became known as the Mosquito. It was made out of basically balsa wood, and in fact they employed all the woodworkers in England, and they had a lot of woods. They didn't need steel and so on. And so actually it had 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines in it, and when it was built, they made it designed and built it in Hatfield House
They took down the farmer's wall and they flew it out at the first. Anyway, this aircraft with 2 Merlins is so light it could out faster than any, at the time, any enemy aircraft, even fighters. And for the rest of the war, it would be the Pathfinder. It would fly in low, ahead of the bombers, and it was so accurate. The most famous exploit of it was that there were a number of French resistance leaders housed in this Gestapo prison, which is surrounded by a brick wall. And so a team of these bombers, Mosquito bombers, flew and actually blew out the surrounding wall and breached the wall. And most of the prisoners escaped, actually. So it was this, and also the other thing it did, it was a pathfinder for the famous Damber. Anyway, that's interesting. If you're talking about airplanes.
That is interesting.
Yes.
Point out that the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine made the P-51.
Yes.
Once they installed that.
Yeah, the original design had an Allison engine. It just didn't have the power above, I think, 15,000 feet. But once they put the Merlin engine, then it could go way high, and was a really, with the long-range tanks, it could escort the B-19s all the way deep into Germany. So Mustang was
451 miles an hour or something like that?
Yeah, 450, yeah. But the Mosquito could do just about that and a little bit more. So it was, with 2 Merlins in it, made a Boston with it, could really go. So interesting plane. Anyway, made a Boston good.
How many years made it? Boston.
Yes, spruce goose, the spruce goose.
I saw it in California. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, I saw it in California.
Spruce wood.
That last one standing?
Yeah.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, I want to thank our speaker. They did a great job here. You know, it brings to mind, you talk about the railroad as far as smuggling things one way or another. I remember years ago in Northwestern, they used to run, there was a conductor who they used to take margarine to Wisconsin because it was illegal to have margarine in Wisconsin. So he would sell margarine in Wisconsin, he would buy bacon in Wisconsin, come back with big slabs of bacon.
Because we wanted butter.
He gave that to all his friends in Illinois. Anyway, it was his little side business he had going for some time. Margarine up, bacon back. Anyway, that was every day, not a freight train. But that's how it goes.
What else did they do?
Well, they did a lot of things.
I know, they had like a wife over here and a wife over there.
Yeah, we had one guy who he might be called a bigamist. He had a wife and a family in Chicago, and he had a wife and family in Milwaukee. And he worked, and he worked the train that went from Chicago to Milwaukee one day, and then from Milwaukee to Chicago that day, and he would go home every night. See, different home. And his wife in Chicago, see, each wife thought he was going overnight to the other end of the line. So the wife from Milwaukee moved to Chicago. And she lived a couple blocks from where he worked. So then he took a job that went to work every day in Chicago. And he would go home to one wife one night and one wife the other next night. This went on for a couple of years. And then his wife went to the store, to the cleaners, and his uniforms were there, and she was picking them up. It was a person that lived in a different, well, that's Mr. So-and-so anyway. That was his uniform, and it was a different dress. So she hooked up with the other wife, found out that he was married to 2 wives, had 2 families, and then she said, she pushed him and said, well, you gotta divorce, you gotta get away from one of us. So he divorced one, and the other one divorced him. So he ended up true story. I forgot his name, but anyway.
These railroad men are all the same.
Famous story with his friend.
Okay, so Tom, so what are you doing on the side?
Yeah.
I worked for the railroad 47 years. And retired. Still alive. Anyway.
They're just like Slats Rogers.
Anyway, our speaker gets to respond to remarks here and close this meeting. You get the last word. Come on.
Thank you.
Come on up. Say whatever, respond to what's said and close the meeting. Say whatever you want.
Now, in closing, I just want to say this is a wonderful group, and I appreciate you getting together to find out what's going on. Thank you.